Hello everyone. Good morning. Good morning. I hope everyone is doing okay as we go into week 2 of quarantine. Hello. Good to see everyone's here. Just looking through the names right now. Awesome. Okay, so same thing as sorry, I peaked my mic there a little bit. Same thing as last week. When the actual lesson's going on, let's keep the chat to a minimum so I can make sure everyone's paying attention. It's also distracting for me if people keep popping up messages in the chat. It's very hard for me to stay focused. So let's tone everything down in chat, please. Okay, let's cool out in chat. I don't want to have to start blocking people, but I will if I need to. So last week we kind of finished up talking about World War II, World War One. So this week we're going to jump straight into World War II. That's not to say that there wasn't any important history that occurred between the two, but I really wanted to focus on the World Wars altogether in these lessons because you'll see how they kind of compound on each other and how one caused the other, and how some people learned a lot from the First World War and some people didn't learn anything from the First World War. So to get started, the title that I came up with for our lesson is It's About That Time for Another World War. It was a very small gap of time between World War I and World War II. I think that's part of the reason why a lot of people were so surprised when World War II started. They kind of thought, it's been such a short amount of time between these two. There's no way that countries like Germany are ready to go to war again. But boy howdy, were they wrong. So as we go through this today, again, it's going to work the same way. I've got a couple of video clips that we're going to watch, and then I've got some stuff that we're going to talk about those, and we're going to have a chance for people to ask any questions they've got. Like I said last time, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand like I just put into chat, or there's another little way you can do it, where if you type if you type an O, just a lowercase o, and then do a backslash, it'll raise your hand like that little emoji there. So that is the only emoji that I'm okay with you using. It's easy for me to see in chat, but again, it's just a lowercase o and then a slash, and you'll raise your hand. So it's nice and easy for me to see there. So if you have questions, you can ask those. Just make sure that they're questions that are relevant to what we're talking about in our lesson. Okay, you don't have to test it out right now. I promise you it works. So if you have a question, just let me know as we get going. Okay, so to start off with, I wanted to go back over the kind of last thing that we talked about in our World War I lesson. Which was the Treaty at Versailles, which was on June 28th, 1919. So this is the treaty that ended the war. It officially ended it, and it gave the Allied powers, which was Britain and France, to kind of come up with what is the punishment going to be for Germany. Like if you've ever done anything wrong at home, you get put in timeout or something. This was just like a much, much bigger timeout. So what we talked about with the Treaty of Versailles, it officially ended World War I, and it really put Germany at the mercy of the Allied powers. Germany had lost the war, their military was pretty well devastated. Kind of whatever punishment the Allies came up with, they had to just kind of agree to that. They didn't really have any other options. And that was especially dangerous because after all the suffering and death that was caused during the war, the Allied powers were really upset at Germany, I think, understandably. So they really wanted to make sure that they felt like the punishment fit. So what we talked about, the four major parts that we talked about was the war guilt clause, meaning that Germany was held responsible for the war. They had to admit, yeah, it was our fault. We started it. Sorry. They had to pay reparations. So they had to pay back France and the United Kingdom for all the losses they suffered during World War I. We'll talk a little bit more about that today. There was also a huge loss of territory. All of the colonies that Germany had outside of Europe, they lost all of those, but they also lost some of their own country as well. They divided their country up a little bit, so they lost some of their own territory. And then this idea of demilitarization. So militarization is to grow your army. So demilitarization is to make your army smaller. So they limited how big Germany's army was allowed to be, to a pretty small number, small enough that it wouldn't be possible for them to start another war. So Germany was left humiliated, weak, and poor, and this is going to be a direct cause to World War II we're talking about today. So I asked you last week to think about how the way Germany was treated after the war might lead them to fight again in World War II. So that's really what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to get started with a quick video. This is from the same guy that made the video last time. So I've broken this into parts, and we're going to talk about it after each part. So here you go with your first video.
It's 1902. A young man by the name of Benito Mussolini moves from Italy to Switzerland to avoid military service. He gets big into socialism, working for trade unions, writing for socialist newspapers, advocating a violent overthrow of European monarchies, the whole shebang. This gets him in a bit of trouble with the Swiss police, so he gets arrested, sent back to Italy, set free, returns to Switzerland, is arrested again, goes back to Italy again, completes his military service after previously avoiding it, and then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally returns to work as an avid socialist. His speeches and journalistic abilities made him famous among Italian socialists. He was anti-war, so when Italy colonized Libya in 1910, he rioted and got arrested. Then World War I came along, and once again he protested Italy's involvement. But then he thought, wait a minute, this war could bring about the social climate needed to overthrow European monarchies and bring about the socialist revolution everywhere. And suddenly he was pro-war. But his fellow socialists didn't like his new pro-war stance, so they kicked him out of the party. So then he said, you know what? I'm done with socialism. We need something new, not based on class divisions tearing us apart, but based on unity through nationality. We'll conquer the Mediterranean and reunite all Italian peoples just like the days of the Roman Empire. I'll call it Fascismo, and it will guide the Italian nation to greatness. That's all well and good, Mr. Mussolini, but what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with bold.
Okay, so the other week, a few weeks ago actually, we talked a lot about fascism and kind of what that system of government means. We even did that example in class where we had a group of students that tried to create a fascist government, and as we saw it, there were some problems that they ran into. So this gentleman here, Benito Mussolini, was the first the first political leader to kind of, officially introduce fascism to Europe. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But there we go. So this is a picture of Benito Mussolini. His nickname was Il Duce, which just means the leader. That's not a super creative nickname, but I guess it works. So he created a totalitarian dictatorship. So totalitarian, you'll notice, has the word total in it. It means that he had complete and total power. There was nothing to vote on. No one else had any say in the government. He was totally in power. So the dictator had total power, is what we mean by a totalitarian dictatorship. That's obviously kind of hard to do because people are going to, if someone has a problem with any stuff that you're putting into effect, they're going to want to argue about it. They're going to want to complain. They're going to want to change stuff. So he put a lot of systems in place to stop that from happening. Things like banning opposing political parties. If I am a totalitarian dictator and I feel like someone else is really trying to take some of my power away, I'm just going to ban their political party. Say, hey, now it's illegal to be in a different political party. And if you try to join or start a different political party, I'm just going to have you arrested or potentially executed. So pretty serious thing there. Censoring is another big part of this. Censoring is a really good vocabulary word to write down. Can anyone tell me in chat, what does it mean to censor something? If we say that he's censoring newspapers, what does that mean? If someone can tell me. I'll give you all a second. Give someone a second to type in an answer for me. So we had a couple different people that said stuff. He's stopping them. Sam said propaganda. That's one kind of good example. To censor something means to take information out or to block information. Let's see. Rule over a monitor. Kind of. We're in the correct ballpark. So to censor a newspaper means basically if someone writes something in the newspaper, basically writes anything. Miss Emily has an interesting article about Dr. Montessori and Mussolini on Classroom. Oh, yes, that's a really good point. Maria Montessori had some pretty strong feelings about Benito Mussolini and his form of government. One of the things I'm sure she would have taken issue with was censoring something. So let's say I am in charge of the government, and I say, Kaya just gave us one. Examine and officially and suppress unacceptable parts of it. My mail is being censored. Exactly. So Benito Mussolini is censoring the newspaper. So if someone were to write a newspaper article or put a picture in the newspaper or have anything in the newspaper or the news that he didn't like, he would just take it out. He would just remove it from the newspaper and say, no, you can't print that. Now here in America, we have freedom of press, meaning that no one is allowed to censor the newspaper. If there was a newspaper that wanted to write something bad about the president or about me or about a business or a company, they are free to write that. We have that freedom of press as long as what they're saying is true. Yes, Maddie, if you have a question, you can go ahead and type it in while I keep talking. He also created a secret police force. So the police's job is to keep people safe and to enforce laws and protect everybody. But if Benito Mussolini has his own secret police force, the only rule they have to follow is whatever rules he gives them. So they could do whatever they wanted. So he's going to use that secret police force to handle and enforce these other problems. If there's a group of people that are meeting to try to oppose him, he's going to have his secret police force shut that group down. If he finds out that someone is trying to spread news that he hasn't been able to censor, he's going to shut that down as well. So Maddie said, how can he do that? And why would he make his own police force? Well, Maddie, that is a great question. The reason he could do that is because he set himself up as a totalitarian dictator. He basically said, all of the rules are my rules now. I'm in charge of everything. And if you have a problem with it, tough. You can leave if you don't like it. This is the opposite of democracy, like we talked about before, where in a democratic group, everyone gets to vote and has a say. Now he says, no, I am in charge. I make all the rules. You have to follow my rules. It's not optional. Let's see. Christopher and Marita, you all both also had a question. If you all raise your hand after I kind of say your name, you can start typing your question in. That was a really good question, Maddie. Thank you. Yeah, so Kaya said fascism. That's exactly what we're getting into. So Benito Mussolini came to power in 1922 and helped found the political ideology of fascism. So good catch, Kaya. He is going to side with the Axis powers in 1940. The Axis powers are the group that's going to have Italy and Germany and Japan in it during World War II. Let's see. Marita said, why did he make it so secret? You're talking about the secret police force. There's a couple of reasons. One, you want it to be secret because you don't want people to always know that they're around. You want them to kind of stay hidden. It also makes people more afraid of them. If they don't know how many people are in that police force and who is in that police force or what their uniforms, look like, you've got this, I'm going to be suspicious. I'm not going to say anything bad about Benito Mussolini because, my next door neighbor could be part of the secret police force. The person sitting next to me at a restaurant could be. It's a good question. Christopher, after the war, Adolf Hitler was dead, so was there a new ruler? But that would not true because this ruler didn't have anything to do in the war. We'll talk about that once we get to the end of the war because after World War II, there's going to be a pretty big difference in how Germany is controlled or who's in charge of Germany. So we talked a lot about fascism a few weeks ago. But we said before, this is a really good vocabulary word, that totalitarian form of government. I can't hear you all. I'm not in a voice chat thing, but I can see your written chat. Yes. So some of the key parts of fascism, it glorifies the state. It says the most important thing in the entire world is that our country, our state, is doing really well. Everything we do every single day, 24 hours a day, should be about making the country more powerful. It's also important that under fascism, there's only one leader and one political party. Fascists would say that if you have multiple leaders or multiple political parties, you end up wasting a lot of time making decisions. Whereas if one person is in charge, they say, okay, here's what we're doing. It's happening now. Boom, it's done. So instead of taking months or weeks or years to make a decision, the fascist leader, the totalitarian dictator, just says, here's what's happening, and boom, it happens. Every aspect of society is controlled by the government. Business, politics, religion, everything is controlled by the government. So there is one person, one power that's in charge of everything in that government. Like we said before, no opposition or protests. There's no political parties. Anything that doesn't support that fascist government is censored. And anyone that tries to break any of those rules is going to be handled by the secret police force. Propaganda, which is another very important word. We're going to talk about a lot about this in our next lesson. And censorship are widely practiced. So if you can control the news and control people's ability to communicate and what information they get, it's going to be a lot easier for you to rule as a totalitarian leader. So Maddie made a really good point. She said, in a way, it is pretty smart. It doesn't sound all that bad on paper. Because you're like, oh yeah, one person makes all the decisions, and we don't have to argue about stuff, and everyone just agrees on everything. The problem is, if you don't agree with what's happening, there's no way you can fight against that. If your fascist leader makes a rule and you don't like it, there is absolutely no way you can try to change that rule. So it does sound okay on paper. Yeah, Maddie says, wait, now that I think about it. Yeah, it sounds okay on paper, but in reality, it's very hard to do because people are greedy and people, don't really care. Yeah, or like Sam said, what if that person's corrupt? All things you have to worry about. So these ideas of greatness and glorifying the state would play a big part in the Nazi Party coming to power as well. So a lot of the systems that the Nazi Party are going to be put into place are based on this type of fascism that was created by Benito Mussolini here. So as I was putting this presentation together and watching through the videos and editing everything, I noticed a few things during that video that kind of made me think for a second. I was like, that's kind of weird. And I happened to have my camera running at the time, so you can kind of see what I was going through, what I was thinking. So check this out.
And then after a brief stint as an elementary school teacher, he finally... But what kind of haircut am I giving you? Let's go with... bold.
So I realized part of the way through planning my lesson that I might have one or two things in common with Mussolini. Luckily, I don't believe in fascism, and I think I'm a pretty nice guy, but I was like, elementary school teacher and bald? Uh-oh. But like I said, I had my camera running, thought maybe you all would find that interesting. So, moving on. We're going to jump into part 2 of our video. During this video segment, if you have any questions about the previous video segment or what we just talked about, you can go ahead and type those into chat and I'll answer those when we come back. But for now, we'll watch another section of our video.
Out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they...
Sorry, I didn't have the volume on.
Italy had been on the winner's side in World War I, and they hoped they were going to get a lot out of it, but in the end, they only got a little, and they felt cheated. On top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that the Italian people were a little unhappy. So when Mussolini came along and said that he could fix everything, his fascist movement gained a lot of support. In 1922, he went to the king and said, "Make me prime minister, or I'll make me prime minister." And the king said, "You and what army?" "This army." Fair enough. Then he went about establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had its first fascist dictator. Next up, Germany. Germany had been on the loser's side, and they got absolutely wrecked by the Treaty of Versailles. They lost territory, had to demilitarize the Rhineland, had to reduce their army to just 100,000 men, couldn't have an air force, had to pay the Allies a huge amount of money that it didn't have. Top of that, a bad economy and weak governments meant that when a small angry man with a silly mustache came along and said that he could fix everything, the German people loved it. Hitler had been a soldier during World War I, and he was crazy patriotic, and nobody was madder than him about Germany's humiliation. He helped start a new political party, and in 1923 attempted a march on Munich with his boys. And then he got arrested. But his popularity grew and grew, and in 1933, the president made him chancellor. He believed he was Germany's great destined savior, and he went full megalomaniac, establishing a dictatorship with himself at its center. Europe had fascist dictator number 2. Hitler and Mussolini had a lot of the same ideas, but more importantly, they had the same enemies, and they started to get along. Anyone else want to be friends? Franco? No? You good? I do. Who's that? It's Japan, and they've taken over northern China. Let's rewind a bit. Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for over 200 years until the Americans showed up and said, you're gonna trade with us and you're gonna like it. Then the Western powers imposed a bunch of unequal treaties, meaning Japan's economy was bust. They also had no natural resources, so they decided to go get some. They went to war with China to gain a sphere of influence over Korea, and they took a bunch of China's stuff. But then the West said, hey, cut that out. And since Japan couldn't take on the West, they said, okay, I guess we'll just go home. Wait a minute, what are you doing? Taking advantage of a weakened China and setting up spheres of influence. But I was the one who weakened them. We know. And you guys didn't let me have anything. We know. That seems unfair. We don't think so. Okay, see ya. So Japan thought, screw this, and went to war with Russia, and stunned everyone by actually winning. Then they fully annexed Korea, but they didn't stop there. In World War I, they took Germany's colonies and islands in Asia, and then in an incident that was maybe staged by the Japanese army, a bomb blew up a Japanese train in Manchuria, giving them an excuse to launch an invasion and take over. So here's the situation. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Japan all believe they're racially superior, all feel hostility towards the Allies, and all want to militarize and take over more stuff.
Okay, so a lot of stuff going on there. Maddie, you can go ahead and ask your question in the chat. So a lot of stuff going on there, and you can kind of see why all these different countries were so upset, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Is why is everyone so mad, and what are they planning to do about it? So we'll kind of go one country at a time. We'll start out with Italy. So if you'll remember at the end of our World War I lesson, Italy was promised a lot of extra territory after why does Japan's flag look different? Oh, that's a good question, Maddie. We'll talk about that in just a minute. It's a very good question. So Italy was promised a lot of land when they joined the Allies in World War I. The Allies said, hey, if you'll come over and join us and stop supporting Germany, we'll give you some of the land that you'd like, and we'll support you in some other ways. And after World War I ended, Italy didn't really get as much as they were promised. So they kind of felt like they'd been lied to a little bit. They felt like they were being mistreated by Britain and France. They knew that Britain and France were stronger, more powerful countries, but they felt like they were kind of being taken advantage of, and they weren't being treated like equals. They were being treated like kids, basically, and they didn't like that. Germany is another big one. So Germany was subject to those major punishments we talked about from the Treaty of Versailles. Their economy was failing, and nobody knew what to do. Their economy was failing because they just lost a war. So they had a lot of people that ended up dead, a lot of damage that had been done to their country. And then on top of that, they were being forced to pay all of this money to Britain and France for the war. So there was no way their economy was going to fix itself, because they needed to be putting money back into their economy. But instead, they were having to give money to the rest of the Allies, the people they fought during the war. On top of that, because again, they really needed money, all of their foreign colonies had been taken away, and they had no strong trade partners. So people didn't really want to trade with them after this war, because they, at the Treaty of Versailles, they had to admit that they were wrong, and that, oh yeah, we started the war and we were bad and we're evil. Oh, we're bad people. No one's going to want to set up a trade with those, with that group. So they're in a really hard place right now economically. They've got no power and no way to get more power, and that treaty is kind of causing them a lot of trouble. Last is for Japan. So it mentioned in that video, Japan had been forced into some unfair treaties with America. They'd set up some trade systems and some different kind of markets with Japan, and it very heavily was weighted towards America. America was making a lot more money and seeing a lot more benefit from that than Japan was. And then Japan realized, like, if we're going to grow our economy, we need to get more resources. So they decided they were going to try to attack over into the rest of Asia to get some more resources. And when they did that, they started to fight in China and Korea specifically. And when they started to fight there to try to take them over, European countries showed up and said, hey, you all cannot do that. That's mean. Don't bully other people. Don't come over here and try to take their stuff. So Japan said, okay, yeah, we're sorry, we'll go away. And then they left. And then as soon as they left, those same European powers came in and took everything. So they let Japan basically do all the work and then swooped in and set up all of the trade and all of the markets there. So they didn't get treated very fairly. So Maddie asked earlier why the flag looked different. I wish I would have had both flags in there. If you all can stop talking about the volume and voice stuff in chat, that's not really relevant. So we can talk about that later, but that's really not the important part of our lesson. So let's stay focused on our lesson, please. The flag that it showed in that video, Maddie, it was the same thing, had the red circle in the middle, and then there were those kind of red lines coming off of it, right? So that was the Japanese imperial flag. So that was during kind of the imperial era. That was the flag that Japan had then, that had those red lines coming off of it. Christopher, you can go ahead and ask your question as well. So after World War II, they would change over to this flag. And actually I could just explain it, but I think it'd be a fun thing for someone to research, because you'll notice as well, Germany's flag changed between World War I and World War II, and then again after World War II. Japan's flag changed. There was quite a few countries whose flags changed. That'd be a really fun thing to do for follow-up work. Do people look at the way flags change? That's a really good question, Maddie. Thank you for that. I'm waiting for a question from Christopher, and then we'll move on. Actually, go ahead and jump to the next one, and I'll keep an eye on for Christopher's question. So we have all these problems, or not we. Doesn't the current flag, the circle, symbol for the sun? Yes. So it's called the Japan, I guess in the West we call it the land of the rising sun, but it is, that flag is symbolic of a few different things. Again, that would be some really cool follow-up work, to look into some of the different flags from World War I and World War II and kind of what they mean and where they got created and how they've changed. That'd be a really cool one if someone wants to do that. So the big question we have now is, how can we fix all of these problems that Italy and Germany and Japan are having? And I don't know about you all, but when I'm having problems with something and I feel like, man, things really aren't going well, I really want to fix all of this stuff, there's like a really fun game that you can play. Called the Blame Game. Okay, sorry, I wanted to do that. So they have all of these problems and issues that they're having, and instead of finding a way to solve them internally, or to take some time and kind of back up and be like, all right, what can we do to fix this, or how can we get ourselves in a better situation, they're just going to start blaming other people for their problems. Now, I want to put this out there. I'm not necessarily saying that they were wrong. And I don't know. Again, this is another thing that people that study history argue a lot about. Were they wrong in being as upset as they were? Or did they have a good reason for being mad? But those three countries are going to start playing this game where they're trying to figure out who's to blame for all of our problems. We don't have any money. No one respects us. These European powers are just kind of stepping all over us and doing whatever they want. So they're going to play the blame game. So these fascist nations, particularly Germany, forgot the name of the country, Germany and Italy, which are our two fascist countries, they're going to start blaming other countries. They're going to blame ethnic diversity, which we'll talk about in just a second. They're going to blame other religions. They're basically going to blame everyone that wasn't them for all of the problems that they're experiencing. So instead of saying, hey, how can we work to better ourselves, or how can we improve our relationship with other countries, they're going to say, no, it's all these other countries' fault, or it's the fact that we have too much ethnic diversity in our country. They're saying, for Germany, for example, they would say, we would be a stronger country and a much more successful, much more powerful country if everybody here spoke the same language and followed the same religion and had the same ideas. The problem is we have too many people that have other thoughts and don't agree with us. So they're going to say that part of that problem is not everybody in Germany is German. They're going to say only German people should live in Germany. Same with religion. They're going to say people spend so much time arguing about religion or doing something that their religion says they should do that's maybe not the best thing for Germany. So instead, we need everybody to be on the same page. Everyone needs to agree to the same rules. So they're going to say that we need to get rid of all of these problems. Yeah, Maddie just said like immigrants are an example. Absolutely. They would use that as an excuse and say, all of these people that are coming into our country are making it a worse place to be. Absolutely, that's something that they would feel. So we're going to see a lot of those beliefs reflected in those ideas of these two socialist groups. In Germany, the Nazi Party is called the National Socialist Group, and then in Italy, it's Italian Fascism. This one's kind of confusing because it's called National Socialism, but they are very anti-socialist. I'll kind of explain what that means a little bit. So if you see, they both had a lot of very similar points. This is why these two gentlemen got along so well. One of them is this idea of radical nationalism. You can go ahead and ask your question, Maddie. Nationalism is like pride in your country, or a belief that your country is really strong and powerful and great. Radical nationalism is saying only your country is strong and powerful and great, and only the people from your country are strong and powerful and great. So this idea that we, just by being from where we're from, are better than everybody else, which I think we can all agree is a pretty horrible way to think. Just because you're from somewhere doesn't automatically make you better than anybody else. But those are going to be a very strong part of these two fascist systems. We already talked about totalitarianism, the idea that we can only have one leader. Violence and militarism are a big thing as well. If people don't agree with you, you can hurt those people, and then maybe they won't argue with you again. And like we saw in our activity that we did in class, building up a strong military. Yes, Maddie, you can ask. Building up a strong military is also a very important part of this. The stronger our military is, the less likely people are going to tell us to stop doing what we're doing. And the easier it will be for us to take what we want from other people. Both are anti-democratic. That kind of ties back into totalitarianism. They'll say if people are allowed to vote, we're not always going to make the best decision. We're going to waste a bunch of time, and we're going to waste all this effort voting on stuff when instead we just need to do what's right. And we, as the two leaders, we know what is right, and no one should argue with us. They're anti-socialist because they didn't believe that everyone should have a shared part of everything. They thought everything belongs to the government, even the people belong to the government. So everything in this country belongs to the government and just needs to do what they're told. There's not an idea of sharing anything. Everyone just needs to do their part. Last, and kind of again ties back into all of this stuff, both of these guys and both of their systems of government were very racist as well. Maddie asked a question about like immigrants, this idea that not only are immigrants, not native, not from Germany or from Italy, but they're actively hurting our country. They're making our country less powerful. The idea that people with different ethnic backgrounds are somehow less intelligent or not as able to help the country out. Incredibly wrong, not at all correct or right ideas, but that's going to be an important part of this nationalism. You need to make everybody that's in Germany afraid of everybody else, and only want to be around, people that are like them. Kai, I agree. It is very cruel. It was a horrible way to run a country, and it was incredibly mean and not, a nice way to treat people. Octane, you can go and ask your question as well. So we'll talk about Nazi Germany a little bit more later, Maddie. That's a good question, though. Maddie wanted to know what is the deal with Nazi Germans. We'll talk about that. I agree, Eshbal. It is rude. So Octane, you can go ahead and ask your question. So these are kind of the big sticking points of fascism between Germany and Italy. And you can see they agree on a lot of this stuff, and all of this stuff focuses on we're better than everybody else, so we deserve, bigger and better things. So Octane said people were slaves in a way. Kind of. It's in a way where, I like to think of it more like people were tools, or they were parts of a machine. In somewhere like Nazi Germany or fascist Italy, if you were a citizen that lived there, your job was to do everything you can to make the country better, even if it hurts you, even if it, means that you have less money, even if it means that you're not happy, you being happy is not important. You just need to do what you can to make the country stronger. Yes, they were meanies, Maddie. Christopher, you can go ahead and ask your question as well. We're going to move on. So what this kind of leads into is who caused World War II. So if we were in class right now and I were to ask you all who caused World War II, I'm sure almost everybody would say Adolf Hitler. He was the fascist leader of Germany during this time. He was the leader of the Nazi Party. I'm sure that that's what everybody would say, that he caused World War II. And if you said that, you are partially correct. Everything that he did leading up to World War II was making everyone else in Europe very nervous. He was mistreating a lot of people. He was encouraging these ideas of racism and treating, people that aren't like you poorly. So you would be correct. I would say that is a correct answer if you said that. Christopher said, was being a Nazi soldier like a job, or were you forced to be a Nazi soldier? Good question. We'll talk about that a little bit next week as well. But when this war gets up and running, there are a lot of people. Some people would join the military voluntarily, but when you start running low on soldiers, you just start making people join the military. So we're actually going to talk about that. Because for pretty much every country that was involved in World War II, they started a form of military draft. Yes, Kai, this is a kind of retouched, colorized picture of Adolf Hitler. So like I said, if I asked who caused World War II and you said Adolf Hitler, I would say that's partially correct. But the important thing that I want people to think about are the things that led to Hitler being powerful. Things like imperialism. We talked a lot about imperialism and all of these people wanting to spread their country as much as possible. Britain and France and a lot of other European powers and the United States and Germany, pretty much everyone that was powerful in the world started practicing imperialism and spreading out all over the planet. And the big part of imperialism is if you are strong enough to take something from someone else, then you can do it. You deserve it. That's what happened during imperialism. If I showed up in another country and I had a stronger military, there was no reason that I shouldn't be allowed to come in and take all of their stuff. So this is basically exactly what Adolf Hitler is going to start doing. So Britain had done this, France had done this, America had done this, everyone had already done this. The Nazi Party was basically doing what everyone else was doing as well. Granted, they were doing it in a very violent, aggressive way, but they were still doing what everyone else was doing at the same time. Again, something we talked about earlier in the lesson was that unfair Treaty of Versailles. The fact that Germany was forced to admit that they were wrong and pay all of this money. Even nowadays, when we look back at the Treaty of Versailles, most countries, America, Germany, or America, France, Britain, even Germany, I guess, agree that maybe those restrictions and those punishments that were put in place were a little too aggressive. It was almost too mean. That of course Germany was going to be upset. Of course they were going to be mad. Marita, you can ask your question. Of course they were going to be upset. So by treating them so poorly, the Allies kind of made this happen. If they wouldn't have been so unfair with the Treaty of Versailles, there might not have been a reason for someone like Hitler to come into power. So they would argue that France and Britain were kind of being bullies a little bit. All right, Maddie, let's avoid saying things like that in chat. That's not really appropriate to our lesson. Okay, and then there were a lot of other things as well that were going to be important to that topic. But obviously, the Axis powers, which the Axis powers again are Germany and Italy and Japan, they were responsible for a lot of the early aggression and early fighting. And we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But we have to look at why they did that. And a lot of the blame can be put on the way those countries were treated and how imperialism encouraged powerful countries to spread around. So both of these are good answers as we go in. But the thing that I want you to really take away from this is the way that France and Britain were controlling and doing things in Europe caused a lot of these problems that they were having. Okay, so on to video section number 3. Here we go.
Let's start with Germany. Hitler hated the Treaty of Versailles, and now he was ready to begin undoing it. In complete violation of the treaty, the first Luftwaffe squadrons were set up, conscription was introduced, and he pimped up his army. The Allies did nothing. Then Hitler sent his army back into the demilitarized Rhineland, giving orders to immediately retreat if the Allies showed up. The Allies did nothing. With his military re-strengthened, he could now move on to step 2. He wanted to rapidly increase the Aryan population, and to do so, he needed Lebensraum, or in other words, he would have to take over the world. But for now, a good portion of Europe would do, and he began eyeing up his neighbors. The Allies finally started to get worried, so they implemented a fairly useless diplomatic strategy called appeasement, and it went a little something like this. Hitler would say, "I want that thing," and the Allies would say, "You can't have that thing." "Okay, you can have that thing, but no more." "I want that thing." And repeat. In 1938, Hitler's army marched into Austria and just took it, with no resistance. Boom, this is Germany now. Next, he demanded to be given the Sudetenland, an area of Czechoslovakia with many ethnic Germans. The Allies held a meeting with Hitler in Munich and said, "Look, we're going to give you what you—" "Hang on, this meeting is about my territory. Shouldn't I come to the meeting too?" "Anyway, we're going to give you what you want." "Really?" "Yeah." "Just like that?" "Yep." "What's the catch?" "Just sign this piece of paper promising you won't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia." "Okay." Then Chamberlain returned home victorious, waving his signed piece of paper in the air, declaring crisis to be averted and the continuation of world peace, and we built a statue of Chamberlain in his honor, and every day on the 30th of September we celebrate Chamberlain Day. Hitler's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. What? He's invading the rest of Czechoslovakia. Oh. You lied to me. What do you expect? I'm Hitler. Not to be outdone, Mussolini also wanted to get in on the action. He thought to himself, isn't there a not yet colonized nation somewhere which is so underdeveloped that the people would be defending themselves against our tanks with literal bows and arrows and wooden spears? Oh, there is? Fantastic. And so he took it. Italy also wanted to control the entrance to the Adriatic Sea, so they occupied Albania. Then, in another incident which was maybe staged by the Japanese, gunfire was exchanged by Japanese and Chinese troops at the Marco Polo Bridge, and the Japanese launched yet another invasion against China. They swept through Beijing and Shanghai, and then advanced through the Yangtze Valley to China's then capital, Nanking. It was here that saw the worst of Japan's shocking atrocities committed against the Chinese people. Back in Europe, Germany and Italy made their relationship status official by signing the Pact of Steel. Then, Hitler turned his eyes towards Poland and the hated Polish corridor, splitting Germany in two. At this point, the Allies really had to put their foot down, and they warned him that an invasion of Poland would mean war. Hitler had planned to continue his advance eastward, but he didn't want to end up fighting a war on two fronts. So for now he made an alliance with Stalin, saying, how about we both invade Poland and split it between the two of us, and I definitely won't not refrain from not betraying you sometime in the future. Sounds good. This new alliance stunned the West. On the 1st of September 1939, German troops entered Poland, and Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Poles fought hard, but they were no match for the two giants crashing down on them from either side. Then came a period known as the Phony War, where everyone just sort of sat around not doing much. The French had launched a small invasion into the Saarland, but they maintained mostly defensive positions, and after a while decided to just turn around and call it a day. Speaking of France, the French were still super proud of their victory in World War I, and they hadn't really moved on from it. They still used horses, they dispatched messages by motorbike instead of using radio, orders from the commander-in-chief were usually pretty vague, and the troops were rarely inspected. They built a line of defenses along their German border, but didn't bother extending it all the way to the Channel, and they wouldn't launch artillery strikes against Germany out of fear of being retaliated against. In a war, they didn't want to attack the enemy, and at first the UK wasn't much better. Chamberlain still naively hoped that the war could be ended diplomatically. Instead of bombing raids, the RAF dropped propaganda leaflets over German cities, which one air marshal said likely did nothing but provide the continent with toilet paper for the duration of the war. They also only sent 200,000 men to France, while the French had mobilized millions. Both Britain and France wanted to avoid a repeat of the First World War.
Okay, so again, a lot of stuff going on there. And we'll kind of talk about that. I want to address some of the questions that came up first. Earlier, Marita had asked, are Nazis still around or no? So that's kind of a difficult question. The Nazi party was a political party. Currently, there is no country that uses the Nazi political party as their like primary, group of politics. But the beliefs and ideas that the Nazi Party started are still around. There are still groups and people in different parts of the world that still believe the same thing. Like that chart that we looked at earlier, believe in like extreme nationalism, and believe that their country and their people are better than everybody else. And there are still groups of people in different places in the world that would identify themselves as believers in fascism, or even believers in like the Nazi ideas. So this is why I asked in chat, and I'll put this out there for everyone else. Please don't answer other people's questions in chat. Let me do that. Because the two answers that you got, people are like, oh no, they're all gone. That's not really true. There are still people around in the world that identify as Nazis, or still believe those same things. And luckily, there's no country that supports those people very strongly. And we all understand that the way that those people think and the ideas that they have are not correct. I mean, look at what those kind of thoughts caused during World War II. But those groups do still exist, unfortunately. Maddie asked another question, said he broke the rules. He absolutely broke the rules. And that's kind of the big focus of that section of the video. They had all of these restrictions and limitations they put in the Treaty of Versailles. And then when Germany and Adolf Hitler started breaking those rules, no one did anything about it. And that is this system of what's called appeasement. This would be a really good vocabulary word to write down, appeasement. Christopher, you can go ahead and ask your question. Marita, you can as well. Thank you. So appeasement is a noun, and it's the act of giving something to an aggressive power to maintain peace. This can happen on a really small scale or on a much bigger scale. Christopher said, is North Korea currently a fascist government, or is it fascist, but not as bad? It's a really good question. I would answer that, but I think I would almost rather someone do that for follow-up work. Do me a favor, Christopher, write that question down, and if you want to send it to me in like a private message, we can talk about that, because there's some interesting follow-up work you could do with that. It is a very good question, though. So appeasement, the act of giving something to an aggressive power to maintain peace. So think about if, let's say I go to I hear someone knock on my front door right now. And I'm like, I wonder what that could be. So I go to the front door and I open it, and there's just like a 20-foot tall bear at the front door. And I'm just like, that's a giant bear. That's a very scary bear. And the bear's like, hey, give me all your salmon. And I'm like, what? And he's like, give me all your salmon. I'm a giant bear. Give me all your salmon. I could choose to not give that bear my salmon, but that's a 20-foot tall bear. That's a dangerous bear. The other option is maybe I appease that bear, and I'm like, you know what? It's probably better for me if I just go ahead and give him that salmon, and then maybe he'll go away. Maybe he won't come back. So the risk of that obviously is, what if now that salmon's gone. What if that bear does come back, and now he asks for more salmon, or he asks like, hey, let me sleep at your house. Let me have your car. So by appeasing someone, you're hoping that they'll just go away. But in this situation, like we just saw in the video, allowing Germany to start doing some of those things, were not going to, that wasn't going to work. They were going to keep getting more and more and more. Marita said, I'm just wondering, are Nazis one race or different races? That's a good question. So during this time period, Marita, the Nazi Party was the political party of Germany. Only someone that was German, really, technically, was supposed to be a member of the Nazi Party. Because remember, a big part of fascism is that belief in nationalism, that you've got to be a part or a member of that country. Obviously, there were other people that weren't, native Germans that would end up joining the party, but it's not a race of people, it's a political party. But it's a political party that a big part of it is everyone being of the same race and from the same country. That's a really good question. So, thanks to appeasement and a weak response from Britain and France, like we saw in that video, Germany was able to take Austria really without firing any shots. They just kind of moved in and said, this is ours now. Christopher, you can go ahead. They then took Czechoslovakia, and then later they took Poland. So for Czechoslovakia, this is the one that really I thought was crazy. Germany was like, hey, we want this small part of Czechoslovakia. And Britain and France were like, okay, yeah, fine, you can have that, but we need you to agree that after you take that, you're not going to take anything else. And Germany was like, okay, yeah, totally, we agree, we're not going to do that. They took that small part of Czechoslovakia and immediately just went and took the rest of it. And Britain and France were like, oh, but they promised. They said they wouldn't do that. Oh, that's so mean. So letting Germany get away with a lot of this stuff early on, exactly, Maddie, they were lying. But, lying is obviously bad, but a lot of the blame also falls on England and France for believing that or allowing them to get away with all these little things. Because as Germany is taking all of this stuff, they're basically setting up to be in a really good situation to start a war. So I found some political cartoons from way back in the day. Christopher and Annabelle, you can both ask your questions. I found some political cartoons from back during World War II that were kind of describing all this. So if you look here, this is Germany, represented by Adolf Hitler, that's marching up all of these different places and taking all this different stuff. And down here it says spineless leaders of democracy. So as World War II started, a lot of people would blame Britain and France and a lot of those other European powers for letting, they basically laid down and let Germany go and start doing all of this stuff. Christopher says, was the rest of the world in as bad a shape as Germany? So how did they fix that? By the money that Germany had to pay. So the rest of Europe was, it had been it'd been over 20 years since the war had finished. So a lot of countries in Europe were doing a lot better. They'd had 20 years to kind of rebuild their economy. Things in America were not going super great. We were in the middle of something called the Great Depression, which we'll learn a lot about next year. So the rest of the world was not doing, they were doing okay, but they weren't doing nearly as bad as Germany, which is part of the reason that people thought, oh, there's no way Germany would fight a war because, they don't have any power. They're weak. We've made them powerless. But by making them powerless, they made Germany mad. And now Germany's basically trying to get revenge. So here was one example of kind of appeasement. All of these countries letting Germany just kind of go and do whatever they wanted, which is going to make Germany a lot more powerful, which means when the war actually starts, it's going to be harder to win. So what appeasement kind of comes down to, the other European powers thought, well, if we let Germany have a bunch of these small things, then they'll just be happy and go away. And they never did. And that was never the plan. There's another political cartoon here. It says, remember, one more lollipop and then you all go home. So if you've ever been to like the zoo or a petting zoo or anything like that, and you start feeding animals, they're not just going to take one piece of food and then get out of the way and let everyone else have some. They're going to keep trying to get food from you. So this is an example of someone here. It says the appeaser that's handing out, in this case, lollipops, is handing out stuff to all these different people. But they're going to keep wanting more and more and more. They're not going to be happy with just what they have. Something kind of interesting that I think is pretty amazing. This would be another unbelievably cool bit of follow-up work that I would love to see some people do. Does anyone recognize the kind of artwork from this picture here, the one on the left? Do any of these characters look kind of familiar or like something that you recognize? Maybe. I guarantee you everyone in here recognizes these or has seen something similar to these. And I'll show you why. Oh, Chloe says looks a lot like the Grinch. Take a look down here at the bottom. I just made it slightly bigger. Look at that. That is Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss was making, he was alive during World War II, obviously. He drew these political cartoons. These political cartoons were drawn by the same guy that did The Cat in the Hat and the Grinch, which I think is crazy because we only know Dr. Seuss as writing children's books. But there were a lot of very famous cartoonists and artists during World War II that would create, this is a form of what's called propaganda, would create different cartoons and posters and whatnot to convince people to support the war effort. So Dr. Seuss was drawing this to oppose, the Nazis, but this was kind of a way of, these kind of comics would be in the newspaper. One of the things we'll look at next week, we'll see a lot more examples of Dr. Seuss's stuff. Disney, everyone here knows Disney, I'm sure. The Walt Disney Company would draw or would do a lot of political cartoons and comics, and they would even do some like animated episodes of TV shows with Disney characters in them, doing, like there's a whole series of them with Donald Duck, where Donald Duck is like helping fight in World War II. So we'll look at some of that next week. But it is crazy to think about. We only know Dr. Seuss is writing children's books, but he actually drew these political cartoons during World War II. Pretty crazy. So what I want to look at next, Why did Britain and France allow Germany to do all this? We've kind of already discussed that a little bit. Why did why did Britain and France allow Germany to do all this stuff? Why were they okay with appeasement? And really what it comes down to is they didn't want another war. Even though they won in World War One, it was very damaging. A lot of people died. It ruined their economy. It's dangerous. No one wants to fight in a war. And they thought, if we don't do this, there's going to be another war. Maybe we can just give them a few of the things they're asking for, and then they'll go away and we'll be fine. At the same time, they also thought, we'll give Germany these couple little things they want, and then they'll just go away. They thought that it was impossible for Germany to be ready for another war. They thought, Germany's been paying us all of this money. Go ahead, Christopher. Germany's been paying us all of this money. We limited how big their military can be. We took away all their colonies. There is no way that Germany could be strong enough to beat us in a war. So they also thought, they said, Germany's still afraid of us. Like, we just beat them in a war like 25 years ago. There's no way they're going to want to fight us again. They're way too afraid. And obviously, from what we know about history, that's not true. Germany was not afraid. It was not impossible for Germany to be ready for a war. It was really only Britain and France that didn't want another war. Germany, for sure, wanted another war. So this system of appeasement is going to just make Germany and the Axis powers more powerful. If it weren't for all of this appeasement, World War II might not have ever happened. So again, a lot of the blame for World War II goes on to Britain and France, not just Germany. Okay? Christopher, you can ask your question. I'm going to move on, though. Oh, cool. I forgot that I put this one in. So I found a quick little video that kind of gives some examples of appeasement and talks about this guy, Winston Churchill, who was a leader in Britain during World War II, and kind of how they handled and dealt with appeasement. So here we go. Nope. Clicked in the wrong spot. There we go.
For the immediate short-term, appeasement's very effective. You just kick the can down the road and it gets, unfortunately, more serious each time you do that. Hitler had less material resources in the mid-1930s than the combined democracies on the European continent. But he felt that because they were so willing to appease him, there must be some reason why that was. And so he kind of concluded that the winners of World War I were more traumatized than the losers. And that gave him more encouragement to try something even grander and bolder each year.
Within a year, the Nazis occupied the whole of Czechoslovakia.
I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
The British people celebrated in the streets because it meant that there wasn't going to be a war. At least they didn't think there was going to be a war. And Winston Churchill actually said the exact opposite, said that this was a disaster, it was dishonourable, we were going to get war anyway, and he said it in the most beautiful, eloquent Churchillian phrases. And
okay, so that's really the most important part of that. And you kind of saw in that video, they had a signed piece of paper from Germany where it was Germany saying, oh, no, we're definitely not going to go to war ever again. And people believed that. They thought that just because Germany signed that paper, it meant that, yes, that was actual video and actual audio from back then. That's why World War II is amazing, because it's the first time we had a lot of video and audio from this time frame. So during, let's see, hold on, I'm going to catch up on questions in a second. But you see, everyone in Europe, they really, really, really didn't want to fight. Everyone in Britain and France, and they thought like, oh, okay, Germany said that if we give them this thing, they're not going to fight us. And they believed it because they really wanted to not go to war. And then you have someone like that gentleman that showed there, Winston Churchill, that was telling everybody, hey, you all need to, you all don't believe them. Don't listen to them. They're lying to you. And no one was willing to believe him. And then when the war actually started, Winston Churchill was going to be very, very important in helping end that war. So we had a couple of questions. Christopher said, the choices Britain and France made, did the rulers make those choices, or did the rulers want to fight, but the commanders defied the rulers' orders? No, it's a good question. So it was obviously in Britain and France, they have a democratic style of government, and all of the government leaders voted and agreed, no, we don't want to go to war with Germany. We'll just give them what they're asking for, and then maybe, they'll go away. They were hoping, they were really, really hopeful that would cause the war to not start, and obviously it didn't go that way. Annabelle said, why did the Allies, France and the UK, worry about making allies with someone else to take over Poland? I assume you mean, why were they worried about Germany making all these new allies? Because every time Germany brought a new ally on or took a new country, that's more land, more people, more money, more materials they could use to build their army up bigger. Chloe asked about the video. Yes, the black and white clips are actual video clips from back during World War II. Yes. Let's see. Okay, cool. So good questions all around. But Germany was not being very truthful with what was happening in this situation. So the guy that was holding the paper there, I actually don't know his name off the top of my head, but he was one of the diplomats that was responsible for helping broker that deal with Germany, where they said, we'll give Germany this little bit of a country that they need, and then they'll go away. And obviously Germany signed that paper, but it was a lie. That was not true. They had no intention of stopping there. So what we get into now is what's called New German Nationalism, and that's kind of a little bit of what they touched on in that video. There was this idea, or it was a word, but also an idea in Germany that was called Lebensraum. Lebensraum means living space. So that's what Germany was pushing and saying, we need more space. We are, part of their nationalism thing is they said, we are better than everyone else. We are the strongest, smartest, most powerful people. So we need more space and we deserve more space. So the idea that the German people needed more space to thrive, they needed to spread all over the planet. They wanted to reunify all German people. So all German people that were living all over the world, needed to come together and help Germany as a whole. This is important because, it's called living space. They're wanting to spread out. It's going to motivate Germany to take over more territory and to make its military stronger to help them take over that extra territory. It was based on those Nazi ideas about racial purity, the idea that they're better than everyone else and we need to spread our better people all over the planet. Obviously not true, but this is what they were telling their people. It applied in Europe and overseas. So as you can see here in this picture, it's them spreading out, into a completely different continent. So in a nutshell, and this is really the most important thing to take away from all this. Yeah, Christopher, you can go ahead. People in Germany felt weak, scared, and powerless after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. Think about being someone that lived in Germany. You just lost a war. Your country's in ruins. Your country's smaller. You've lost all your colonies. You've lost all your money. You're not allowed to have a military anymore. You basically feel like you feel like a child. So they were very scared and powerless. Then Adolf Hitler shows up and says, no, we're not scared and weak. We are super powerful. And if we can spread out, if we can follow this idea of Lebensraum and spread out all over the world, we'll be the most powerful people on the planet. And these people that were weak and scared after World War I, they wanted to believe him. They said, oh, finally, someone that's going to make us strong and happy again. So Hitler basically, he used people's fears and their desire to blame others for their bad situation to get them to support the war. He said, no, this isn't our fault. This is everybody else's fault. We're going to, they have to deal with this. So we're going to make them pay for what they've done to us. Again, we're playing that blame game. We're shifting blame onto other people. Because of this, every man, woman, and child in Germany was basically required to support the war effort and hope that Lebensraum would become a reality. And most of them were happy to support that war effort. They said, finally, we're not going to be treated like little kids again. We're going to be respected and powerful. We're not going to be scared or powerless. Other people are going to be scared or powerless. Maddie said, it's crazy to think about people saying, oh, we'll just give them this part of the country and they'll go away. Yeah, it's crazy to think about that people, like throwing around countries like candy. The idea that if you give someone what they want, they're just going to be happy with that and go away. No, they're going to come back and they're going to want more. Exactly. So we looked at some political cartoons from earlier that kind of showed a little bit about how Europe and the rest of the world was feeling. But Germany is going to do the same thing. They're going to put out these propaganda posters that have these very powerful images and very powerful words on them that are encouraging people to be like, you are, proud, powerful German people. You need to have as many kids as possible, and you need to join the military, and you need to fight these other evil forms of government like communism or capitalism, or democracy, excuse me. So both countries are going to start up basically an ad campaign trying to convince everyone that the other country is wrong. So this kind of ties into that blame game as well. All right, last video clip, and we'll check this one out.
And so they wanted to keep the war as far from home as possible. So they turned their eyes north, towards Norway. Neutral Sweden was exporting iron ore to Germany through neutral Norway, so the Allies asked them if they could please stop exporting iron ore to Germany, but this request was refused. Then the Soviet Union attacked Finland, so the Allies said, how about we land troops in Norway and move them across Sweden to go help out your good pal Finland, and along the way maybe take control of all your arms. But Norway and Sweden still said no. So the UK mined the waters around Norway to force any transport ships into international waters, and they also attacked a German tanker they found in the area. Hitler realized what the Allies were up to, and he quickly moved to secure his supply of iron ore. He launched an invasion through Denmark into Norway. The Allies rushed to land troops at key ports along the coast, but Germany had taken control of Norway's airfield, and their air superiority decided the fight. The Allies had to retreat. After this slightly embarrassing failure, Chamberlain resigned and was replaced with Winston Churchill, who had a slightly different approach to dealing with the Germans. Hitler's overall strategy was similar to Germany's First World War strategy. Attack France, defeat France, knocking out the UK in the process, then turn on the Soviet Union and win the war. During the Phony War, the Allies had given Hitler time to prepare his forces. Now, he was ready to attack. The Allies had wanted to place troops in Belgium, but Belgium had refused, and in a move that surprised pretty much no one, Hitler launched an invasion to get around France's defenses. The Allies charged into Belgium at full speed to meet the German invasion head-on, and it looked like a repeat of the First World War was coming. But this time, Hitler had a trick up his sleeve. Blitzkrieg. As the Germans advanced, they sent thousands of refugees westward, slowing down the Allies. Then, to the south, the French had left the Ardennes, an area full of hills and forests, pretty underdefended because they thought it was naturally impenetrable. Well, the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. They smashed 50 Wehrmacht divisions through and encircled the Allied armies at lightning speed. The best of the Allied forces were now trapped. The Germans squeezed in from all sides, taking out France's best armies and nearly wiping out the British too. But they managed to make a desperate last-minute escape at Dunkirk, with British civilian ships even making the perilous journey to bring their young men home. With most of the French forces depleted, the Germans breezed through, taking Paris, and France fell. What the Germans couldn't do in World War I, Hitler had done just like that. Hitler hoped that with the fall of France, the UK would also lose hope and sue for peace. But quite annoyingly, it didn't, and he needed to secure the Western Front, so he tried to force them into submission with mind games. The UK were now all alone, and Hitler wanted to emphasize that. First of all, just before France fell, Italy finally declared war on the Allies, making the UK's situation even worse. Next, instead of just occupying all of France, Hitler occupied the coastal areas for defense, but allowed France to continue its existence as a German puppet state. This way, it looked like the UK's old ally had decided to switch sides. Hitler also hoped that the UK wouldn't attack any of her old allies' navy bases or colonies in Africa, giving Hitler an extra line of defense to the south. But the UK made sure to respond to this by sailing down to France's navy base in Algeria and wrecking a bunch of ships. So have at it. Hitler then began laying down plans for an invasion of Great Britain. Before German troops could land on British soil, he would first need air and naval superiority across the Channel. Waves of German bombers came, while the completely outnumbered RAF worked bravely around the clock in an attempt to quell the German attacks. At first, the Luftwaffe targeted British ports and coastal facilities. Then it attacked RAF bases, crippling the RAF's ability to defend the nation. And it looked like Hitler's Great British invasion was coming. But then, Churchill ordered a small, pretty insignificant bombing raid over Berlin. It didn't do much damage, but Hitler was furious, and he immediately ordered the Luftwaffe to refocus its attacks on civilian targets in London. Children were sent off to the countryside, away from their parents to avoid danger, and frequent trips to air raid shelters became a daily occurrence. But British morale held firm, smiling, knitting, lounging casually. This refocusing on London also gave the RAF breathing space to reorganize, so Hitler kind of shot himself in the foot there. Just the foot for now. Finally, the Luftwaffe sent one massive all-out attack on London, and the RAF successfully repelled it, destroying many of the German aircraft and placing air superiority firmly in British hands. Hitler's invasion had to be postponed, but the bombing of British cities continued for some time.
Okay, so that's a pretty, slightly more worrying video segment. Had a couple of questions. Marita asked, are there any books about Hitler? Yes, there's a whole lot. There's a lot of history books written all about him, because there had never been a leader kind of like him. And we'll talk a little bit more about, next week we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about what was Germany's long-term plan. But yes, there are lots and lots of books, historical books about him, or history books about him, yes. Maddie said, if countries like Italy and the UK wanted to go to war, could the countries in between, like France, be mad and join the war? Absolutely, yeah. You've got to think about, if you join that war, where are you going to fight? You don't want to make anyone else around you angry, absolutely. So for the Blitzkrieg, we talked about revolutionary form of war. It was a new lightning war. This was the exact opposite of World War I. In World War I, remember, they used trench warfare, where everything was very slow and plodding, and you just kind of sat in one spot and fired back and forth at each other from trenches. In this new system, it's about getting there as, fighting as fast as possible and overwhelming them quickly. And Germany was ready for this plan, and obviously the rest of Europe was not. Like we saw in that video, they were able to push into France really, really, really quickly. Germany realized that if they tried to fight a slow war again, then they would just get pushed from both sides, possibly. So here's the basic idea, 3-step process for a blitzkrieg. Step 1 is you attack your enemy, and you attack them incredibly hard and incredibly fast to the point where they can't set up a good defense, and you actually start pushing through them. And once you break a hole in that enemy's line, then you circle around behind them, and now see they're completely surrounded. So it showed an example of that happening in kind of northern Europe, and the German army actually completely surrounded a bunch of British and French troops and pushed them all the way back up against the ocean at a place called Dunkirk. And at Dunkirk, the Allies wanted to get those soldiers out of there, so they actually had a bunch of civilian like fishing boats basically that came over and rescued a bunch of soldiers. It was pretty amazing stuff. So this is kind of an example of what I was talking about. Remember last time in World War I, they mostly just fought a lot right along this border really slowly for like months or almost a year at a time. During World War II, as part of the Blitz, or the Blitzkrieg, it was called the Blitz for short, Germany just pushed out. I mean, they almost exploded out into France and basically took over all of France. So Italy's on their side. They've got Russia not really doing much way over here. So now it's really Great Britain is the only country left to kind of fight against them at where we are at this point in the war. So just like where we got in World War I, we're kind of at a point right here where it seems like nobody's going to be able to stop Germany. All of that appeasement and all of that not taking it seriously was enough to really put the Allies in a pretty dangerous spot at this point. They talked about like the Blitz in London, which again goes against the Geneva Convention rules, but at this point Germany was just directly attacking London, bombing the city constantly for 8 months. As you see here, it was pretty amazing. British people were still going around and delivering milk while there's, firemen here putting out fires and cleaning up the streets. So even during all this going on, Maddie, you can go and ask your question. Even while all of this is going on, people in England are still hunkering down and doing what needs to be done. It was a pretty phenomenal, I was pretty proud of Britain during this time for being so, strong and resilient during all that was going on. Now, World War I took about 4 years. That is correct. It did it again. I don't know why this keeps happening. It looked fine earlier, and now the quality on it gets really bad. We'll start off with this next week, but we've got, before we start talking about the war, in detail next week, looking at the two different sides, the Allies and the Axis. The Allies ended up eventually being Russia, America, China, and England. The Axis powers were Germany, Japan, and Italy. And then we'll start looking at how many soldiers were actually involved, and it was far larger numbers than we saw during World War I, but we'll talk about that next week. So Maddie said they didn't use trench warfare anymore. Not as much as they did. Part of it was how much technology had changed. They had bigger, stronger tanks. They had an air force. They had a navy. They had bigger bombs. They had better guns. So sitting in one spot would be a very bad idea. So they didn't use trenches nearly as much or in the same way as they did in World War II, or in World War I, excuse me. World War II is much more about moving around very quickly. And having really quick, really powerful fights in a lot of different spots. It's a good question. So our next lesson, we're going to focus primarily on propaganda, which we talked about today. We're going to focus a lot on military technology. There's a lot of things that came out of World War II that were pretty amazing bits of technology. Things like night vision and radar. All of those came out of World War II. And just kind of looking at how this was a new type of war, both how people were fighting, where they were fighting, and kind of what they were fighting about. So we'll look at a lot of that next week. So for follow-up work, here in a minute, I'm going to post this PowerPoint, onto the stream, so you'll have access to that. I apologize for the stream kind of getting interrupted. I think my internet shut off there for a second. So I will edit these two videos down into one video, hopefully, and put this up as quickly as possible. Yeah, sure, Maddie, you can do a Blitzkrieg newsletter. So for follow-up work, these are a few examples, but I want you to do your own thing. I want you to find something that you think is interesting. So for follow-up work, you can find a piece of World War II propaganda, British, French, United States, German, whatever. We looked at some examples before and explain what it is encouraging people to do. Also talk about why it is important and what role it played in the war. You can do a slide, Google Doc, infographic, however you want to do it. But there's a lot of really cool, interesting kind of propaganda you can look at that all these different countries were putting out. Same thing that we had last time. You can learn about an important person, event, or a piece of technology from World War II and tell me about it. There's a phenomenal book that I've got. I wish that we were in class and I'd let you all read it. The book is called My Tank is Fight, which is a weird translation of a German phrase, but it's all of these crazy inventions that came out of World War II, different types of tools and weapons and airships and tanks and all this crazy stuff. It's like almost science fiction feeling stuff. Octane Nadon, you can go and ask your questions, even though I think I know what they're going to be. You can do a slide, infographic, or other creative presentation, however you want to present that information. If you just want to write me an email, if you want to do a video, if you want to, of course, so can you work together? Always the first question you ask. I'll get to that in a minute. Yes, Marina, you absolutely can. I would be okay with that. But more importantly, I really want you to do your own thing. I'm happy to give you some ideas with stuff like this. Go ahead, Maddie. But I want you to do your own thing. Come up with something you think is interesting, something you're interested in, something you want to learn more about, and research it. So you can find another video to watch and then write me a summary of that video. Tell me what you learned. I found another website that's got letters from home. A lot of people really liked that last time we did letters from home for World War I. You can read and give me some information about those letters from home. I want you to find another way to continue your research about World War II. You can research whatever you like. Be sure to let me know what you decide to do and ask for help if you need it. I'm going to be in the Discord. I'm going to put this assignment up in the stream as well. You can ask me questions. But the most important thing for this is this part here. I want you to do your own thing. Find something you are interested in and do the work. If you feel like, oh, there's nothing here you're interested in, that's fine. I've given you some examples here of stuff you can do. But I want you to be able to choose what you want to do and make that decision. Can I do a sculpture with a thing on the bottom with info? Absolutely, yeah. If you wanted to make me a sculpture of something. Some of the stuff we talked about in the lesson, stuff about flags would be great. If you wanted to do some research into those different types of flags and how they worked. Again, different types of technology that came out, specific people. Winston Churchill is a very interesting person to do. Marita said she wanted to do a paper about Hitler. That's fine. You can research and learn and study about whatever you want. I just want you to find something you're interested in and teach me about it. I want you to teach me something new. So I'll hang out in here for another couple of minutes if you all have questions, and then I will post this PowerPoint, the follow-up work assignment, and after I get the video edited, I will put the video up on our YouTube channel. For the YouTube channel, real quick, you all can start typing in your questions if you've got them. The first two lessons that we've done, the World War I lesson and my biology lesson, are up there. This lesson will go up there soon. Miss Emily is going to start posting some videos up there. So please add that YouTube channel. I'll post it again in the stream. But we're going to be putting stuff up there for you all to use and start looking at. So everyone that's raised their hand, you all can ask questions. I'll keep the stream up for another 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll wrap everything up. Bye, Kaya. Thank you. What happened to Russia? Good question, Elon. So at first, Russia helped Germany take over Poland, and we haven't really talked about them again. So we're going to talk about them starting with the next lesson. But Russia is eventually going to end up joining the Allies. They're going to join in with Britain and France. But we will talk about that. Yeah, there wasn't much about them in this first section. All right, who else had questions? Maddie and Eshbal. Bye, Marita. Thank you very much for your questions. Those were great. Octane, you can ask your question. What is the Zoom thing? I don't know, Kaya. That's going to be something you'll have to talk to Miss Emily about. Eshbal, can we research about flags? Yes, please, Eshbal. And if a group of people wanted to do that, yes, please, do that. Sam, we heard you the first 5 times, bud. Thank you. We're good. So yes, you can do the flags. You can work with someone else on that, but I want to make sure you're learning something new. Any other questions? Octane just said, how do we edit the videos? I don't know what you mean. How do we add it? Thank you, Audrey. Will Blanford, bye. All right, I've got 2 more minutes for any other questions. So any other questions you've got, let me know in here. If not, I'm going to be in the Discord for the next couple of hours. My grandparents, great-grandpa made maps during... Oh my gosh, yes, please, Maddie. Maddie said her grandfather made maps during World War II, and he told your dad about it. Yes, please. Like, interview him and let me know. That is amazing. I would love to hear all about that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. If anyone has any other questions, I'm going to jump over into Discord. Also, there's only a few people left. I'll put something about it in the stream, but Maddie made a good suggestion. We set up a recess channel. So I'm going to put up some information about that, but there's going to be a channel in the Discord that you all have a set amount of time that's going to count basically as recess, where you can go in there and you all can chat about whatever you want and share videos, and however you'd like to use it, that'll be your free time in there. So Christopher, yes, you can call me on Discord and we can talk about that. Maddie, I didn't see another question from you, but yes, you can interview your parents or your father. Yes. Yes, Elon, we will start talking about kind of what Nazi Germany was doing with concentration camps and how they were handling anybody that they saw as an inferior group. Yes, and I would love some input from you all about that. I know your dad came in and gave a talk to the class a few years ago about that I heard was amazing, so I'd love to hear more about that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream here. Sorry for our little interruption there in the middle. Thank you all for jumping back in so quickly. Like I said, I'll be in Discord if anyone needs help. So enjoy the rest of your day. Get some work done. Bye.